Welcome to our closing plenary. Everything that we live together in these 4 days culminates here. We long to hear the prophetic calls of our three distinguished speakers. As a last exception, we want to be very generous. Each speaker will have 20 minutes to summon us. As usual, I will briefly introduce each one of them, all of them together. Now, because of our time limits, we will not have time for questions after their prophetic calls. Our first speaker is Professor Pablo Blanco, professor at the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina, University of Buenos Aires, and the National University of La Plata. He was also director of Latino America, the Journal of Selam, the Consejo Episcopal Latinoamericano, the Latin American Episcopal Council, as we have heard a few minutes ago, from 2011 to 2015. And he is a regional committee member of Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church for Latin America. He is a doctoral fellow at the University of Buenos Aires and has a master in social doctrine of the Church from the Pontifical University of Salamanca, and from the University of Buenos Aires, the degree of Magister in Public Administration and degrees in Higher Education and Political Science. His main research interests are at the intersection between moral theology, political theory, and political ethics. Professor Emmanuel Catongole is Professor of Theology and Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, United States of America. He earned a PhD in philosophy and a master's in theological studies from the Catholic University of Leuven. A Catholic priest ordained for the Archdiocese of Kampala, Uganda, Professor Catongole joined the University of Notre Dame in 2012 as a faculty member of both the Kroc Institute for International Studies and the Theology Department. Prior to that, he served as Associate Professor of Theology and World Christianity at Duke University, where he was founding co-director of the Duke Divinity School Center for Reconciliation. He is the author of books on the Christian social imagination, the crisis of faith following the genocide in Rwanda, and Christian approaches to justice, peace, and reconciliation. Among his 9 books, I will mention the last 3 books. Born from Lament, on the theology and politics of hope in Africa, published with Herdmans in 2017. The Journey of Reconciliation, Groaning for a New Creation in Africa, published with Orbis in 2017. And The Sacrifice of Africa, A Political Theology for Africa, published with Herdmans in 2010. Professor Catongole current research is on the issues of identity, belonging, and violence in Africa, part of the Contending Modernities Project, a research and education initiative examining Catholic, Muslim, and secular forces in the modern world. Finally, our third speaker is Professor Linda Hogan, Professor of Ecumenics at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. She just ended her term as co-chair of Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church, as we all learned at the beginning of our conference. She is the author of 3 books. First, From Women's Experience to Feminist Theology, published with Sheffield Academic Press in 1995, and republished by Bloomsbury in 2016. Second, Confronting the Trust, Conscience in the Catholic Tradition, published with Polis Press in 2000. And third, Keeping Faith with Human Rights, published with Georgetown University Press in 2016, as well as numerous articles and book chapters. Her research focuses on feminist and political ethics. Without further ado, Pablo Blanco.
Estimados colegas, buenas tardes. Dear colleagues, good evening. As you can guess from my voice, I was suffering illness during these days. I want to thank my colleagues, Love and Compassion at Medicines, to be here now. So, well, I will begin with my presentation. My paper title is Rethinking Theological Ethics from a Bridge Building Perspective. It's okay? Do you hear? Yeah. Well, in light of these days, it is clear for me that theological ethics approach to reality should not consider only to extend an ethical view over the world, but to try to find out how much God is present in reality, even if just seminally. On the other hand, the social facts, symbols or text should be interpreted instead of being objectively described and explained under the signs of the times in a dynamic hermeneutic. The need of a new theological praxis rises clearly, thus bringing together theory and practice in the field of reality, action and contemplation, teaching and studying, pastoral and theology. It is not about theology becoming praxis. It is about a new theological praxis, the possibility of reading praxis in new categories and theological keywords. This new theological reading of reality challenges theologians to go beyond mere theories towards the event of incarnation and to understand the narrative of the people of God from a prophetic view. It would be fitting to remember that in the New Testament we can find two ways, at least, of doing theology. We have St. Paul's speculative theology, and then we have the narrative theology of the Gospels. There is a philosophical speculation typical of the Hellenist culture and of Paul, and there is a historical account proper of the biblical tradition. As time went by, theology was systematized and organized in treatises, and Paul's speculative theology turned out to be more determinant than the narrative theology of the Gospels. We learn more about the theology of redemption preached by Paul than about Jesus' testimonial and prophetic presence. Between the speculative and narrative theology, Pope Francis forges a pastoral theological option, what I call a bridge-building theology between them, like Puebla's document calls a pastoral vision of reality, Puebla's Bishop Conference of 1979. Thus, the purpose of theological ethics could be to approach the social historical situation from an understanding made in faith and a prophetic view. As St. John Paul II points out, quote, the theological dimension is needed both for interpreting and solving present-day problems in human society, end of quote. So, the challenges for a bridge-building theological ethics are, from my point of view, to address theological places and dimensions, to expose many ongoing actions aimed at transforming reality, many of them peripheral or non-hegemonic, like Yad for Peace, for example, to express the grammar of simplicity by a simple way of teaching, writing, and speaking, and to discover the seeds of the word, evangelical values underlying, that shows God's whispering presence. I will now try to describe briefly four theological praises: history, people of God, culture, the poor, and three dimensions we can recognize: a Marian dimension, a missionary discipleship dimension, an epistemological dimension. History as a theological place. As said in Medellin 1968, we are commemorating 50 years of this Latin American Bishops' Conference. People and their communities are inserted in economic, human, historical systems, and institutions crystallize in unfair structures, quotations. What St. John Paul II denounced as, quotation, a world subject to a structure of sin. We have talked about this during this morning. This assertion is reinforced by Pope Francis' quotation, it is the evil crystallized in in unjust social structures, we cannot be the basis of hope for a better future. End of quotation. But God shows himself and continues to act for human salvation. The event of incarnation is not a limited and isolated event in history. This Christological settling reminds the Church that is Church in the world, as incarnation reminds that Christ and history become Word. A bridge-building theological ethic commits with a historical fulfillment of the divine plan. In the currents of history, I remember Trento, each person and each community of people can influence and co-influence with God's grace help. The purpose of our Christology is to deconstruct an image of Christ linked to a remote space-time context, to read the signs of his saving presence in all time, and especially today. The people of God as a theological place. The representation of the human being as an isolated individual and the consideration of every subject of study as a disjoint fragment is not consistent to our Christian anthropology that inspires bonds of reciprocal recognition, of shared hopes, and community projects of justice. The signs of the times are distinguishable in the events of the people. Apart from being a geographical reality, there is a community of peoples with its own history, specific values, and similar problems, as we've seen these days, no? A bridge-building theology can recover the Christian proposal of communitarian project of justice and salvation. The ecclesial community is the natural sphere of membership for the people of God, where others are a gift for us and we are a gift for others in a fraternal relationship. Let's talk about culture as a theological place. The mission of the Church reaches culture because it is the place of all human activity, aiding on its journey in search of truth, and also in the selfless search for peace. The word culture means the relationship with nature among us and with God, as Pope Francis said. Culture is a way of asking about the meaning of the personal existence, an open search for truth and justice, renew it in each generation, and a reflection of how people and society think of themselves and their destiny. Language, history, loving, working, dying, the attitude at the great mystery of God expresses and reflects culture. Popular religiosity expresses a confident clamor for justice, liberation, and redress, and also is a way of fraternity and reciprocity. It is part of the Church's mission to discover in religiosity the secret presence of God. Quotation, the sparkle of the truth illuminating us all, the word's light present even before incarnation or apostolic preaching. Medellin. Cultural imperialism despises religiosity, particularly popular religiosity, as a sign of identity. It forces acculturation from an attitude of superiority, active or passive. An appealing tale masks a frightening truth. Many Christian values around the world are disappearing due to the overwhelming influence of cultural colonization and globalization. A bridge-building theological ethics must consider that popular culture contains values of faith and solidarity capable of encouraging the development of a more just and believing society, and possesses a particular wisdom and riches which ought to be gratefully acknowledged. We should encourage theologians to discover these valuable roots and set them wings. The poor as a theological place. God shows himself and love, especially those who are forgotten and looked down on. The poor are a place of revelation and conversion for theology and for the church, but they are also a historical and universal reality. The preferential option for the poor is not just another decision in Christian life. It is what characterizes it. A bridge building theological ethics should consider their problems and struggles as own. Speak for them, but not to quiet the voice of the poor, nor interpreting them, but to denounce injustice and oppression. In the Christian fight against the unworthy condition of the poor people, and also to commit to dialogue with those responsible for this situation. These 4 theological places matches with 3 dimensions I have mentioned. The Marian dimension first. It is the feminine dimension of the church, not hierarchical. It shows a bond of proximity and commitment between the divine presence and the human experience before life and history. Mary's maternal figure sums up the disciple answer of the church. Pope Francis describes it beautifully. Quotation: "Whenever we look to Mary, we come to believe once again in the revolutionary nature of love and tenderness. In her, we see that humility and tenderness. In her, we see that humility and tenderness are not virtues of the weak, but of the strong, which do not need to treat others poorly in order to feel important themselves." End of quotation. The missionary disciple dimension. The mission does not require a kind of alignment, nor it is a call for a few chosen ones, because those who know and love the Lord need to share with others the joy of being sent, of going to the world to announce Jesus Christ, to make love and service a reality for those who need it most. That's the sign of a bridge-building theological ethics. What is more, faith challenges us to leave our confinement and comfort, to be more fully humans. Faith sets us free from isolation because it takes us to communion. There is no discipleship without communion. Being disciple and being missionary go hand in hand. The discipleship cannot be considered apart from the mission. Being disciple is being missionary. The epistemological dimension. As social issues are complex, answers should be considered from a multiple lenses perspective. Historical, memories and forgetfulness, political, structures change, citizen engagement with the public space, economic, financial system, fair trade, social, poverty, gender issues, cultural, interculturality, globalization, ecology, theological, religion and society, faith and reason, among many others. The purpose of addressing the complexity of the social issues is to avoid naturalization, trying to give relevant, timely, and fruitful answers according to a bridge-building epistemological attitude. My final reflections. We are an open learning community which works through cooperation based on dialogue, sharing projects and actions with other colleagues and institutions committed to transformation of reality. Networking is our sign of recognition. We encourage the study, teaching, and researching from a brand new theological ethics, entering into dialogue with culture, communities, and institutions. We believe in bridge-building ethic. It is not a pragmatic ethic guided by the urgency of consensus or convenience, neither utilitarian nor individualistic, that rules out opportunities for deep social transformations. All our efforts have only one destination: the transformation of unjust realities of many brothers and sisters who inhabit our continents. Ideas disconnect from reality lead to idealism and nominalism. As Pope Francis stated, no amount of peace building will be able to last, nor will harmony and happiness be attained in a society that ignores and pushes to the margins or excludes a part of itself. According to our theological experience, proposals always run in a different way in each place and context. But there is something that we believe is essential to all the experience that we appreciate. They are always under the logic of communion and the living presence of Jesus among us. We want to offer an unprecedented answer from the different expressions of the Church. For us, harmony is not uniformity. Unity is not just consensus. Diversity is not chaos, and pluralism is not inconsistency. However, our strength is not only this communion. Each project and action is done with others too. We discover ourselves as brothers, and we invite others to join us. Furthermore, the Holy Spirit that renews all things also renews our vocation for peace and justice under the sign of communion and mercy, to go out to men and women of today and offer them a concrete sign of mercy. Finally, as a conclusion of these days, I would like to raise a humble Sarajevo manifesto as a green balloon that Gustav Kovacs recognized. This message wants to be that green balloon with a message that I wish to touch our minds and hearts. We say no. No to an economy of exclusion and the new idolatry of money. No to a financial system that rules rather than serves. No to the inequality that spawns violence. No to a spiritual worldliness. No to surrender at cultural imperialism and the tragic banality of political leadership in too many countries. And we say yes to a new relationship brought by Christ. Yes to safeguard human dignity and creation. Yes to the challenge of a missionary discipleship and a renewed inculturation of faith. Yes to the recognition of popular religiosity richness. Yes to join men and women committed to truth, justice, solidarity, and peace. In summary, we say yes to a bridge-building theological ethics. Thank you.
Professor Emanuel Catongole.